we live in a torrent of immediate information. Our attention is treated not as an internal resource to be cultivated, but as currency to be bought, displayed, and desperately sought after. Every ping on our screen, every notification flashing across our peripheral vision, demands a piece of our emotional bandwidth, convincing us that the most valuable commodity we possess is simply our capacity to react. We are conditioned to seek validation in these fleeting digital echoes. The like, the comment, the confirmation that another soul has briefly paused its own frantic existence to acknowledge our mere presence. This endless cycle creates an illusion of connection, but often delivers nothing more potent than a profound and unique loneliness, the deep echo chamber where we mistake external recognition for genuine internal worth. We are taught from childhood that happiness is an accumulation. Grades accumulated, friendships accumulated, likes accumulated, until some arbitrary threshold of contentment is met. We build our sense of self upon the shifting sands of other people's opinions and unpredictable outcomes. The problem, as philosophy has persistently shown us, is not the world itself, but the intensely gravitational way we cling to its surface, mistaking temporary reflection for foundational reality. Ancient wisdom held a stark counter-narrative. It did not advocate for withdrawal from life, nor the erasure of human connection. Rather, it proposed a radical realignment of focus, a meticulous distinction between what is truly ours and what is merely borrowed. The great philosophers wrestled with this dichotomy, most powerfully articulated by Epictetus centuries ago. He drew a clear boundary line through the fog of modern anxiety. On one side stood the things that belong utterly to us, our judgments, our choices, the intentions we cultivate within the quiet sanctuary of our minds. These are the only possessions immune to theft, accident, or external will. On the other side lay everything else, the outcome of a debate, the favor of a superior, the fickle attention of the crowd, the physical condition of your body tomorrow, even the thoughts that cross another person's mind unbidden. These things are indifferent to our control. They belong to fate, circumstance, and the unpredictable complexity of other people's freedom. To live by this distinction is not to become emotionless, nor to simply withdraw from society. It is rather to achieve a profound psychological mastery, a freedom that only comes when we cease pouring all of our vital emotional energy into realms where no human will ever be able to secure anything. We are constantly suffering precisely because we have assigned an impossible level of importance to things by their very nature outside our jurisdiction. Consider the inherent tragedy in this misassignment of value. When a job rejection hits, or when a carefully crafted personal statement falls flat, the pain is immediate and sharp. But the core agony is not merely the dismissal. It is the perceived failure of us to achieve what was hoped for, as if our worth were tied irrevocably to that single professional outcome. We become trapped in a feedback loop. We seek external approval because we lack internal validation, creating a desperate craving that only leads to further emotional depletion. The modern anxiety is therefore not merely about failure. It is the exhausting performance of trying to control an uncontrollable system. It is the frantic attempt to sculpt reality into the precise shape of our expectations, demanding that the world, and indeed every person within it, conform to a self-authored narrative of ideal success. And this expectation, by its very nature, creates suffering. Expectation is merely resistance against what simply is asterisk. The challenge laid before us today is thus one of relentless, quiet observation, mapping the boundaries of our own power. When we find ourselves experiencing a rush of anxious energy, a surge to check a phone, to rationalize and slight, to predict a future disaster, we must pause and ask this fundamental question. Is this concern genuinely rooted in my will, or is it merely my judgment regarding something that belongs entirely outside my sphere of influence? To learn where our true borders lie is the single greatest act of psychological liberation. It means accepting reality not as a personal indictment, but simply as raw material, a series of events upon which we retain total sovereign authority to decide how we choose to react. If we look closely at the things that cause us the most anxiety, the anxieties that keep us scrolling through screens late at night, or lying awake contemplating a meeting that happened days ago, we find they are rarely about what actually occurred. More often, they concern the gap between what is asterisk and what we feel compelled to believe asterisk should be asterisk. This feeling is perhaps the single greatest source of modern human suffering, the tyranny of should. It manifests as a subtle, invisible script that dictates our worthiness, our happiness, and our right to an uncomplicated life. We carry these expectations. I should be successful by 30. I should find love by this year. My career trajectory should look like someone else's LinkedIn feed. And when reality refuses to conform to these internal mandates, we experience a profound sense of failure, shame, or discontent. Stoicism asks us to examine the source code of that demanding voice. It is seldom the external disappointment itself that wounds us. Rather, it is the cognitive dissonance between our perfect internal model and messy reality. The tyranny of should convinces us that life must operate according to a pre-approved blueprint, a highly curated narrative sold by society, advertising, and comparison culture. We treat these societal scripts not as suggestions, but as immutable laws of physics governing human existence. When we fail to meet them, we assume the failure is inherently moral, belonging to our very character. But what if the should was merely a poorly constructed agreement, one that was never meant for us in the first place. Epictetus teaches us that freedom begins with realizing that these expectations, the rigid idea of how life ought to be, are judgments, and thus they are not facts, they are mere mental constructions. This is where we must develop a radical self-skepticism toward our own internal monologue. Every time the voice whispers you should, we must pause. We must ask, who said that? And to what end? Is this expectation serving my genuine well-being? Or is it merely enforcing an idealized version of myself dictated by others' perceived standards? Consider the modern performance of success. We scroll past curated highlights, the perfect vacation, the promotion, the flawless relationship milestone. We compare our messy, internal reality, which includes doubt and fear and exhaustion, to someone else's polished facade. This comparison is exhausting because we are not comparing apples to apples. We are comparing our whole self to a carefully edited fiction. The pain arises when we mistake these external markers, a perfect job title, an engagement ring, the approval of a friend group, for being absolutely necessary for our core sense of worth. We assign them a categorical value. If I do not have this outcome, then I am deficient. This is an ancient pattern of thinking that traps us in endless striving. It suggests that happiness is not an internal state of resonance, but rather a collection of external achievements required to pass some invisible societal test. The solution lies in dismantling the very concept of necessity. Many things we treat as non-negotiable social status, specific types of income, immediate gratification, are what Stoics call preferred indifferents. They are preferred because they seem good, and therefore our minds build massive emotional structures around them. But stripped bare, they are simply indifferent. To say that wealth is bad is impossible. To say that it is supremely good requires a belief in its power over your inner peace, and recognizing that inherent neutrality is terrifying because it forces us to decouple our self-worth from the economy of external goods. We must practice treating reality as it presents itself, raw and unadorned by expectation. If rejection comes, we observe the sting, but we refuse to incorporate it into our identity narrative. Rejection does not mean I am worthless. It means a specific outcome did not align with a specific need at a specific time. Similarly, if praise is given, we accept the kindness without allowing ourselves to become brittle or inflated by the temporary emotional surge. We acknowledge the data point, the compliment, the missed deadline, the lost opportunity, and then let our judgment settle on it, recognizing its ultimate irrelevance to our moral core. The practice of abandoning is not a surrender to indifference. It is an aggressive reclamation of autonomy. It is choosing freedom over the comfort of a rigid narrative. It means accepting that life will be unpredictable, messy, and far more complex than any single societal script can accommodate. Our tranquility does not come from controlling our environment or our peers' perceptions of us. It comes only from mastering the internal citadel, the space where we decide what judgments to accept and what expectations to discard. To live free is to refuse the premise that your value can be quantified by external applause. We often live in a peculiar state of psychological exhaustion. It is the weariness that comes not from physical labor, but from constant anticipation, the draining vigilance of trying to manage outcomes we never truly own. We carry around this exhausting blueprint for how life should function, predicting every slight shift in relationship dynamics, calculating the precise effort needed to maintain a certain status, or constructing elaborate mental scenarios about future failure. It is a weight of control that proves fundamentally unsustainable. We are masters of micromanagement, the tiny anxieties concerning whether we replied promptly enough to an email, if our casual comment landed with the intended warmth, or how someone else perceived our genuine vulnerability. In doing so, we mistake knowledge for actual power. This relentless need to predict and adjust creates a perfect vacuum where peace used to reside. Consider the modern job rejection. It is a single piece of external feedback, a polite refusal that hits us precisely when we feel most invested in the narrative of our own competence. Our immediate gut reaction is not simple disappointment. It is a sudden, deeply personal indictment. It feels like proof that we failed to calculate correctly. We begin a cascade of retrospective failures. Did I sound confident enough? Should I have researched their company history more deeply? Was my resume formatted optimally for emotional resonance? These questions are the residue of the failed blueprint. They represent our desperate attempt to find one single variable, one point in time, or one word chosen that could retroactively adjust the outcome. We treat reality like a solvable equation, believing that if we just adjust enough internal parameters, enough confidence, enough industry knowledge, enough emotional preemptiveness, the desired result will materialize. The problem is that life rarely adheres to the logic of our personal spreadsheets. Most significant events are stochastic. They are governed by sheer chance, by the imperfect calculus of other human beings whose motivations lie beyond the reach of our careful consideration. And when we try to impose our perfectly controlled narrative onto a chaotic reality, what emerges is not understanding, but agony. This need to control becomes indistinguishable from our self-worth. If the external outcome, the promotion, the acceptance, the perfect relationship is threatened, then our internal identity feels threatened too. We are attaching the core of who we are to a fluctuating metric that someone else is holding entirely outside our sphere of influence. The Stoic challenge here is radical and profoundly uncomfortable. We must stop treating life as a script that requires our meticulous hand-tuning. We must accept the principle that genuine agency resides not in the successful execution of a plan, but in the quality of our judgment when the plan inevitably dissolves into unpredictable dust. Touch upon the misunderstanding within a relationship. Perhaps an intimate partner becomes distant. Our immediate internal response is to analyze every recent interaction. The tone of voice used over dinner, the 3 minutes spent scrolling on separate phones, the subject that was left unaddressed at the breakfast table. We construct complex psychoguidary models attempting to predict their mood and thus how to optimally fix it. We are trying to master another consciousness using only our limited tools, our own emotional logic. This is where the mental expenditure becomes criminal. We pour massive reserves of vital energy into predicting the irrational movements of others. We assume that if we just analyze hard enough, if we adjust our words and gestures with sufficient intellectual precision, that we can build a kind of predictive shield against natural human unpredictability. But connection itself is inherently messy. It involves the vulnerability of two separate free wills interacting imperfectly. The moment we acknowledge this, that the optimal way to manage another person's emotional state does not exist, and furthermore, that our best intentions are powerless against their unpredictable feelings, is when the blueprint finally starts to crumble. And that crumbling is terrifying because it forces us into a radical freedom. This freedom demands that we retrain ourselves to accept enough of understanding, enough of effort, enough of intention. Not necessarily the desired result. We must consciously decouple our internal definition of success from the external validation signals, the likes, the emails, the pats on the back. Those things are simply ambient noise, beautifully rendered, but ultimately meaningless when defining our core self. They are mere Adiaphora in motion, valuable only if we grant them value through sheer force of attachment. We must learn to watch the machinery of control, the constant what-ifs and if-onlys, and recognize it for what it is, a sophisticated but ultimately useless self-torture mechanism. The goal is not apathy. Indifference, as the world often misinterprets it, does not mean that nothing matters. It means that nothing matters more than your own judgment of how you choose to live in the face of imperfection. It is the deep, quiet realization that while we must respond thoughtfully and diligently to the world, our internal state, our capacity for reasoned assent or disagreement with reality, that remains the last unassailable fortress. It is a return not to perfect order, but to resilient acceptance. It is finding peace in the imperfectly constructed moment, knowing that the blueprint was flawed from its inception. And true mastery lies only in gracefully accepting the weight of what simply is here and now. If suffering is the consequence of misunderstanding what belongs to us and what does not, then perhaps the key to freedom lies in reevaluating value itself. For too often, we live under a false economy of worth. We spend our mental energy desperately accumulating status, demanding approval, or fearing poverty, treating these external conditions as if they were fundamental necessities for existence. Yet, if we truly look closely at them, we find them to be remarkably fragile things. Most of the things that prompt our most visceral reactions, the sudden critical comment online, the coveted promotion, the perceived slights in a relationship, are not inherently good or evil. They simply are. Imagine a ship adrift, not simply drifting with the gentle currents of a summer harbor, but tossed by the brutal, unpredictable might of an open ocean. This is the vessel of our lives, subject to winds we cannot command and waves that strike without warning. For so long, we have spent our energy trying to steady the mast, frantically adjusting sails against the fury of the sea itself. We believe that if only we could just control every gust, predicted every trough, or predict the precise trajectory of disaster, then finally, peace would arrive within the hull. But the lesson of the shipwreck is brutal and profound. True stability cannot be found in external mastery. We have spent these chapters establishing a profound truth, that much of the pain we endure is not caused by external events themselves, but by our own judgment about those events. We cling to things, to achievements, relationships, health, and mistakenly assign them supreme value. This belief makes us brittle. It means any threat to what we consider vital feels like an existential catastrophe. If true freedom lies in detaching from the uncontrollable, how do we systematically practice that detachment? It is not enough simply to accept the philosophy intellectually. We must train ourselves to endure loss, emotionally and psychologically, before it actually happens. This brings us to a potent, sometimes startling, but deeply practical technique: negative visualization. The ancients were not advocating for morbid dwelling or despairing of what might be lost. Rather, they prescribed it as an emotional inoculation, a deliberate mental exercise designed to inoculate the soul against the shocks and sentimental excesses of life. Think of it less like a prophecy of doom and more like stress testing your own sense of self. By imagining loss before it happens, we strip away the unnecessary layers of sentimentality that cloud our judgment when difficulty strikes. We are practicing psychological resilience. When the real blow lands, the job is lost, the loved one departs, the health declines. It will not strike us with the sheer, overwhelming shock that unprepared hearts feel. Instead, we will have a practiced muscle memory of calm recognition. The exercise involves systematically imagining the absence of things we currently take for granted. Imagine waking up tomorrow and finding your most prized possession gone forever. Not just its monetary value, but the irreplaceable role it played in your identity, the photograph album that defined a decade, the reliable car that represented freedom, the physical health that allowed you to pursue your dreams. Allow yourself to feel the initial pang of disappointment. Feel the instinctive wave of denial. Acknowledge the gravity of the imagined loss. But then, gently push beyond the emotion and ask yourself, what remains? What is fundamentally untouched by this absence? The key insight gained through this mental contemplation is that while we will certainly experience grief, our core self, our capacity for reasoned thought, our judgment, our inherent value as a person remains entirely intact. The loss is external, the source of our being remains internal. This practice reframes impermanence not as a threat to be feared, but as the raw material of life itself. It forces us to distinguish between things that are truly essential for flourishing and those that merely serve as comforting accessories. When we visualize losing wealth, we realize that while it certainly complicates logistics, it does not diminish our capacity to reason or our inherent dignity. The power of negative visualization is its ability to cultivate profound gratitude, but a functional gratitude. It changes appreciation from being a passive sentiment into an active recognition of the value of what you currently possess, precisely because its absence has been mentally simulated. We are building cognitive armor. We are desensitizing our emotional responses to disappointment. By preemptively confronting the shadows of loss, we remove the power these potential losses hold over our immediate reactions. When life inevitably deals us a blow, a professional rejection, a difficult goodbye, we do not react from a place of unprepared shock and utter despair. We react from a position of studied calmness, recognizing it merely as another fluctuation in the universal stream. The ultimate goal is to reach a state where external circumstances become functionally neutral. They cease being sources of high drama or low misery, and instead are simply observed facts. The magnificent life requires us to love what is good, but more importantly, it demands that we learn to endure what is merely temporary. This quiet, resilient mastery, the ability to maintain one's inner citadel regardless of the storm raging outside, that is where true emotional freedom resides. We have spent much of our lives, perhaps unknowingly, in a state of perpetual reaction. Our emotions are often not choices, but rather the immediate overflow of stimuli, the instant surge of pleasure at praise, or the abrupt, burning flare of anger at perceived slight. We live as if stimulus necessitates response, and that this direct electrical arc between event and feeling is immutable. Stoicism teaches us to reject this false necessity. It points to a crucial, sovereign space, the gap, the moment, the pause, Consider any intense emotional conflict unfolding in modern life. Perhaps an argument flares up across a screen, or unexpected bad news drops into your lap, demanding immediate outrage, defense, or tears. Our primal instinct is always to move, to react, to defend, because we perceive that stillness is synonymous with weakness, and silence means submission. Yet, this very belief that we must immediately respond is the cage builder. The art of measured response is not merely delaying a reaction. It is reclaiming sovereignty over your own internal landscape. It is the disciplined act of creating space between the external event and your judgment upon it. The pause itself is a psychological muscle. It feels unnatural, even dangerous, in our hyper-connected age, where every notification demands an immediate acknowledgement. We are conditioned to mistake busyness for productivity and response for action. But wisdom suggests that true action requires profound stillness. This space allows the raw, automatic impulse, the knee-jerk reaction, fueled by ego or fear, to dissipate, allowing something more refined, something thoughtful, to surface in its place. To implement the pause is to become an observer of your own mind's drama. When that sudden feeling of heat rises, that wave of indignation, humiliation, or anxiety, do not immediately latch onto it as truth. Instead, observe it. Acknowledge its presence without validating its premise. Ask yourself a simple question. What emotion am I experiencing right now? Where in my body do I feel this tension? Is this physical sensation an accurate representation of reality, or merely the accumulated residue of old fears and unmet expectations? This technique works against the immediacy demanded by modern life. When someone cuts you off on the street, your mind instantly conjures narratives of disrespect, frustration, perhaps even danger. Your impulse is to curse, to yell, to justify your annoyance. But if you introduce a deliberate interval, a fractional second, the script breaks. That gap allows the rational part of self, the Stoic core, to whisper, "Wait, what was that? Does this action necessitate the internal chaos it promises?" The pause challenges our deep-seated desire for immediate resolution. We want the narrative to conclude quickly. Who was right? And what is the punishment for being wrong? But true maturity recognizes that some narratives simply require nothing more than gentle observation to dissolve. We are training ourselves away from emotional reflex toward ethical deliberation. Take it into the realm of deep disagreements, those arguments where two proud egos collide, each convinced of its own perfect righteousness. In those moments, the pressure to articulate, to defend, or to win is overwhelming. The urge is to throw out a volley of sharp words, weapons designed not to convey truth, but merely to wound and enforce temporary dominance. The practice here is harder than external conflict. It is self-conflict. The pause demands that you resist the intoxicating rush of vindication. You must learn to sit with the discomfort of silence when your instinct screams for battle. The purpose of measured response is not to avoid confrontation, but to transform its character. We shift from reactive combatants who operate solely on emotion and historical grievance to careful strategists who respond only after rigorous assessment. This means distinguishing between things that are inherently wrong actions, like injustice or cruelty, and those which are merely contrary to your personal comfort level. Most interpersonal conflicts fall into the latter category. The space you create, however brief, becomes a laboratory for philosophy. In it, you can test judgments against reality itself. Instead of thinking, "This person wronged me, therefore I must react violently," the pause allows the formulation. The person said something that made me feel wronged. My internal judgment is suffering, and the primary locus of that suffering resides only within my agreement to accept this narrative. It is a radical act of self-detachment. It means withholding the automatic emotional payout, the satisfaction of being understood, the relief of clearing blame, the momentary rush of moral superiority. You are essentially telling your limbic system, "I hear you, but we are going to wait. We need more data." This process takes patience, and often there is no visible reward for this inner work. Sometimes responding measuredly feels like yielding. Other times it merely feels exhausting because you are continually fighting the momentum of your own deeply ingrained reflexes. But every time you find yourself on the brink of that immediate emotional detonation, and instead choose to breathe, to count slowly to 10, or simply observe the temperature of the air before you speak, you are reinforcing a foundational freedom. You are asserting that while circumstance may deliver the blows, your response remains absolutely yours. This controlled breath is not merely breathing. It is the physical manifestation of reclaiming authorship over your inner life. And that, fundamentally, is where true and unshakable